Parles-tu français? Hablas español? Parli italiano? If you've used Babbel, you would. Babbel's conversation-based techniques teaches you useful words and phrases to get you speaking quickly about the things you actually talk about in the real world. With lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts and voiced by real native speakers, Babbel is like having a private tutor in your pocket. Start speaking with Babbel today. Get up to 55% off your Babbel subscription right now at babbel.com/Wondery. Spelled BABBEL.com/Wondery. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says that Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. That they can't just abdicate all of that power to the president.
Yeah, and this is already in courts. Day one, in fact, the tariffs have not gone into effect yet, but day one after the proclamation, in the weirdest way possible.
Welcome to Law and Chaos, and welcome to Liberation Day. And by liberation, we mean higher prices, fewer choices, and vastly decreased American power. Also, wasn't there something in the Constitution about Congress having the power to lay excises? We've got a lot to cover, so let's get after it. Happy Friday, Chaos Monkeys. I'm Liz Dye, and with me, as always, is Andrew Torres. Andrew, how are you?
Hi, Liz. I am super excited because didn't you hear that we imposed reciprocal tariffs that will be paid by our enemies, by foreign nations, and will generate, I don't know, hundreds of billions, trillions, quadrillions, sextillions of dollars in new revenue?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't hear you over the sound of the stock market breaking in half like the Titanic and sinking into the sea. So great job, President Iceberg. Anyway, that's it for our show today. I got to go buy avocados for the last time ever.
Liz, you're going to be fine just so long as you don't look at your retirement account on the way to the supermarket.
Yeah. Oh, my God. So, look, we had a great guest lined up for today. That's going to get pushed back to Tuesday's show, which is for the best because it seems like tariffs are kind of the big story.
You think?
Yeah. But first, docket alerts. Dun, dun, dun.
Docket alert!
Dun-dun.
Okay, let's begin with some procedure, specifically the federal rules of appellate procedure.
Civ Pro is my love language.
Mine is the Sephora half-yearly sale, which starts tomorrow. No, this is really, really important. Like, we spent a long time on Tuesday's show talking about how all the Trump cases are moving in tandem through the courts, first complaints, then temporary restraining orders, then preliminary injunctions, etc. Here's the important bit. Federal cases start in district court, and a lot of the Trump cases have been brought in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia because A, that's where we keep the seat of government, and B, the judges there are by and large pretty good, both in terms of their overall intelligence and also their experience with complex administrative law cases because of, point A. Mm-hmm. So appeals from the District Court in D.C. go to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit. Circuit court judges operate as a 3-judge panel, which is randomly assigned, except
when a party petitions the D.C. Circuit for emergency relief, which in these Trump cases kind of falls into 2 buckets, right? So in almost every single case so far where a district court judge has entered any kind of order whatsoever that affects the Trump administration, from administrative stays to temporary restraining orders, right, to requests that a party answer questions from the court about why it's defying its orders, right? Like, this DOJ has run to the appellate court, to the D.C. Circuit, and asked for all kinds of emergency relief, right? Mandamus, an emergency stay, relief under the All Writs Act, like, you name it, they're filing it. So that's kind of bucket one. And then second, when that fails and goes up to the Supreme Court and loses and goes back to the district court level, you then have courts that enter a preliminary injunction, right? And that is an appealable interlocutory order, right? Even though it doesn't dispose of the case on the merits, because a preliminary injunction can run for years, you can file an appeal immediately. And the merits on that appeal do indeed go to a randomly assigned panel. But If the government also requests emergency relief in the form of a stay of that district court preliminary injunction pending the appeal, that also, along with that first bucket, gets assigned to a pre-selected 3-judge, what is literally called the special panel, and that is chosen at the beginning of every month, and they sit for the entire month. So for the month of March, that panel was Patricia Millett, a centrist Obama appointee, Karen LaCraft Henderson, a very conservative George W. Bush appointee, and Justin Walker, one of the most knee-jerk and least qualified MAGA hacks in the country. So that panel was bad, and we were looking forward to April.
Yeah, well, be careful what you wish for, because the April panel is Cornelia Pillard, a, perfectly fine Obama appointee, and Naomi Rao and Gregory Katsas, 2 hardcore Trump appointees who are going to give the Trump administration basically whatever they ask for. It's like, seriously, Rao thinks she's going to get Justice Sotomayor's seat, and Katsas probably doesn't think he's getting a promotion, but he worked in the White House counsel's office during the last Trump administration, so nothing that comes out of this panel is going to be good or even related to real law in most cases.
Yeah, and so after a month in which the wingnuts worked themselves into a froth complaining that, Chief Judge James Boasberg and Judge Beryl Howell are stealing all the Trump cases and there must be a conspiracy afoot, let's do some actual math here. There are 11 judges on the D.C. Circuit. Of those, 7 were appointed by Democrats, 4 by Republicans. So the odds are about 30% that if you draw a panel at random, it will have either 2 or 3 Republican appointees on it. And of those 4 Republican appointees that are on the D.C. Circuit, Liz, you and I, before we went on air, tried to rank them in terms of awfulness, and there are a lot of low cards in that hand, is all I'll say, right? Like Karen LaCraft Henderson, we agree, she's the least worst, and she's terrible. She did at least get shamed into not going along with Justin Walker in the JGG deportation case. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But the other 3 are Katsas, Rao, and Walker, and in my view, they are sort of interchangeably awful.
Yeah, I know you have a special loathing for Walker, but I think he at least likes to pretend to be doing real law. I have not seen any of that from Rao and Katsas.
Fair. But I think the larger point is any D.C. Circuit panel with 2 Republicans on it is going to be bad, right? And that's going to pop up almost a third of the time. It definitely sucks that it's happening now. So, I think we should talk about what the implications are.
Yeah, okay. So if a district court does something the administration doesn't like issuing a temporary restraining order, the appeal of that will go to a special panel, and that special panel is the one with Katsas and Rao on it. And even in cases where the government is appealing a preliminary injunction, the initial request to stay the lower court's preliminary injunction will also go to the Katsas-Rao special panel. And, I think they're pretty clearly going to rule in Trump's favor every time. They already have. Judge Amy Berman Jackson issued a preliminary injunction ordering the government not to burn down the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We talked about that, I think, on the Tuesday show. The government appealed that injunction and got an administrative stay of the order from this panel with Katsas and Rao. Oral argument is set for April 9th, but who knows how much of the CFPB is going to be left by then?
Yeah, that's a real concern. But I do want to say we are not powerless to have Katsas and Rao run wild, right? And I don't think the D.C. Circuit is going to let them just open the floodgates and let Trump run roughshod over the courts. I could be wrong. The option that is available is what's called a petition for rehearing en banc. That means from the full 11 judges on the D.C. Circuit. That is governed by Rules 35 and 40 of the Federal Rules of Appellate Procedure. Let me say at the outset, right, is because we don't peddle hopium here. It is very rare for a full circuit court to sit en banc when it comes to emergency relief. But that is permissible, right? Either a party that is aggrieved or the court sua sponte, that is on its own initiative, can request, quote, an appeal or other proceeding be reheard en banc. And that means, other proceeding includes these per curiam orders that stay a district court's preliminary injunction, and they can be reheard by all 11 judges. All it takes is a majority vote. That is 6. And as we pointed out, there are 7 Democrats on the full D.C. Circuit. It is disfavored. That's the language of the rule. But one of the explicit grounds in the rule for granting en banc relief is when, quote, the proceeding involves one or more questions of exceptional importance. And this involves one or more questions of exceptional importance. So I agree with you. Bottom line, it's going to be bad over the next month. But we are not completely without options.
Yeah, I think what we're looking at here is a question of, is the DC Circuit going to play by, Queensberry rules, as they say, right? Because the Trump administration is clearly not. The rules say you can't appeal a TRO, much less an administrative stay, and they've appealed them, consistently every time, pretty much. And so I think the question is, if this kind of en banc on an emergency basis relief is disfavored, is the DC Circuit going to say, well, you guys are not playing by the normal rules and we're not going to play by the normal rules? Or are they going to kind of bend over backwards to say, well, the Trump administration is going to get all the process, so we won't look partisan? I don't know the answer to that question.
I don't either, but I guess what I would say in the column of maybe the DC Circuit will be a bit more eager to jump in would be analogous to Judge Amy Berman Jackson being, as far as I can tell, the first district court judge ever to enter an administrative stay, right? Like that was, until Donald Trump was president, right, exclusively the domain of the appellate courts. And she said, no, look, like I have the power as a judge to do this. I can enter an admin stay right now, freeze everything for 48 hours, then hear a TRO, and then hear a preliminary injunction. And that was because the Trump administration was doing things no president had ever done before. So I don't know. I mean, I know the courts are different. I know, we'll have to see. You're not wrong, but I'm not sure that it's completely cut and dried.
Okay, if you're a subscriber at patreon.com/lawandchaospod or lawandchaospod.com, no ads for you ever. Otherwise, we will be back on the other side of this brief ad break. And we're back. Okay, let's talk about JGG v. Trump. That is the case involving the kidnapped Venezuelans sent to a Salvadoran gulag prison. Mm-hmm. And it's basically become bifurcated thanks to the government's appallingly bad behavior. Remember, this is the one where Judge Boasberg said, turn those planes around, and the government just ignored him.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to get into the details because there was a hearing today, but it's even worse than that, right? Like, it is not just that the government ignored the court's order, which clearly they did. It's that the government also took steps to hide what they were doing, basically dropping the executive order, allowing the deportations to happen as they were loading these men onto the planes. Like, every single thing about this was done to evade judicial review and get folks out of the country where they were no longer subject to the jurisdiction of Judge Boasberg.
Right. So this case is now effectively in two pieces. One piece is the legality of those deportations, which is being challenged. Mm-hmm. And the other is the government's contempt of the judge's order. So there's already a TRO, which the last emergency panel refused to stay. That included Judge Karen LaCraft Henderson, like we said. The hearing on the preliminary injunction is Tuesday, I think. But today, Thursday, as we're recording, there was another hearing on the second issue of the government's defiance of the court order. And that was wild.
Yeah, I listened to that hearing, and the DOJ was again represented by Drew Ensign. And I wouldn't say it was openly defiant, right? Judge Boasberg essentially cross-examined him for an hour. He certainly was not what I would call cooperative.
Yeah. You want to give us a little bit of a rundown of what happened during that hearing?
Yeah. So essentially, Judge Boasberg wanted to conduct fact-finding, and he began by getting Ensign to admit, he said, look, after I issued my TROs, the government was free to still keep Tren de Aragua members in custody, right? Yes. It was free to deport Tren de Aragua members. Yes. It was free to deport them even under expedited review because they have been designated as a terrorist organization, right? Yes. And in fact, the government did so last week while my TROs were in effect, right? Yes. So at the outset, what Judge Boasberg did was pretty much eviscerate the government's, national security arguments about how prejudiced it would be if, the court's interfering with his ability to conduct foreign policy and all that?
Yeah. Let me just interrupt you for a second, because you're not talking about the national security implications of deporting these people. You're talking about the national security implications of talking about what happened with those 3 planes that went out on a Saturday night, basically while Ensign was in court arguing about it, right? That the judges now said, tell me what happened so I can assess whether you defied me. And they've said, oh, no, we can't do that because it'll impact national security and it'll impact diplomacy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so then Judge Boasberg kind of narrowed in on that question and said, tell me when the proclamation was signed. And Ensign said, Friday the 14th. And then Judge Boasberg said, well, why was it then not made public until 3:53 p.m. on Saturday, March 15th? And Ensign said, well, I don't know. And then Judge Boasberg said, well, the president was asked about this and said he didn't even sign it, right? And that was a point you made in our written post this week.
Yeah, Trump went on TV and was like, I don't know, I didn't sign it, but Marco Rubio's doing such a good job and all this. I mean, I wrote about it in a written piece at Public Notice because it was such a bizarre juxtaposition with them saying that the pardons that Biden signed don't count because he was too checked out or it was signed with an auto pen or whatever bullshit reason that it was. But it was, Trump himself doesn't seem to understand when he signed it or where. But really the larger point is that he signed it and they kept it under wraps so that they could issue the proclamation kind of instantaneously with deporting these guys.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So 2 things. Number 1, I still want my Elon Musk is the auto pen t-shirt. But number 2, the plaintiffs in this case, lots of people got wind that this executive order was coming down the pike. And so Judge Boasberg had already been notified, had already issued a TRO with respect to the 5 named plaintiffs in this case, saying don't remove them from the country by 11 a.m. And so by holding the proclamation back until 4 p.m., which by the way was when Judge Boasberg had initially set the Zoom hearing for the hearing on class certification, right? Whether to make this a nationwide injunction preventing the administration from doing that. They were rounding folks up, sending them to Texas, putting them on the planes. And in fact, Judge Boasberg asked that question of Ensign. He said, is there any other inference that I can draw that other than there was an expedited effort by the administration to get people on the planes in advance before you had to come into court and defend what you were doing? And Ensign said, well, I don't really know. Like they don't tell me about the operational details, but I don't have any other inference that I could draw.
Yeah, this, as we said in our written post yesterday on our website, this is like the 3rd time or maybe the 5th time or whatever in a week that courts are saying the Justice Department lies, right? Judge Amy Berman Jackson said that in the order with regard to the CFPB that the Katsas, Rao, Pillard panel just stayed, and Judge Dale Ho said it in New York with regard to the Eric Adams dismissal of the case, which the government wanted to do in this really squirrely way, and he didn't say you guys are full of shit, but he didn't not say you guys are full of shit. And here, Judge Boasberg is saying the same thing, right? Like, it's very clear that the government behaved in a totally shady way. Oh, and also, this is a play that they've run in D.C. as well before Judge Tanya Chutkan, where they asked for a delay in the case of the EPA funds, right? The gold bars case. We've talked about it a bunch of times. But this is one of the cases where the government didn't want to live up to its contract, and they were in this kind of dispute over EPA funds. And they said, can we just have a 1-day delay of this hearing? And then in that 24-hour period when they delayed it, they canceled the contract. And then they were like, see, nothing to argue about. We've mooted the case. And Judge Chutkan was like, that was squirrely as hell, and didn't let them get away with it. Or she hasn't ruled yet. She I mean, I don't think that she's going to, but the point stands, right? That the government is just rapid fire burning through the presumption of regularity and the credibility that the state should have, right? That the Justice Department should have, has traditionally enjoyed, because they send these lawyers in and they tell abject lies, and they do these really squirrely things, which, that's what Ensign is caught here. Is Boasberg going to make them pay for doing this really squirrely, defiant thing?
Well, a squirrely thing that happened here that we haven't previously talked about that Judge Boasberg explicitly put into the record, into his questions, was Judge Boasberg had initially scheduled that Zoom conference on class certification for 4 p.m. on Saturday. It later got rescheduled to 5. When he convened it at 5, and you and I were on that at 5 o'clock, Ensign came on and said, in answer to the first question, Your Honor, I don't know. Right? The question was, are there any planes, whatever? And Judge Boasberg said, well, can you find out? And Ensign said, yeah, I can find out. Give us an extra hour. And he did. He canceled the 5 p.m., moved it to 6 p.m. And while that happened, the government used that time period between 5 and 6 p.m. to load people onto planes.
Right. The plane left at like 6:30. So
yeah, like 5:40.
They were definitely,
actually, if you want to.
Yeah, right. So they were putting people on those planes in that time.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we didn't seize on that additional delay, but Judge Boasberg was super not happy about it. So then Judge Boasberg asked Ensign, look, what did your client tell you about the operations? And here, Ensign said, well, that's attorney-client privileged. I can't tell.
Good luck.
Right, yeah. And Judge Boasberg was like, gave a little mini lecture of the sort we have done on this show before and said, counsel, it's only attorney-client privilege if the client is asking you for legal advice and you render it. Are you telling me what time the plane left is attorney-client privilege? And Ensign said, well, I don't think so, but we would like the opportunity to brief it. I'm not going to make this call here in court right now. And there were a bunch of situations like that, right? Like Judge Boasberg said, was there anyone in the room with you when you were on the call? The Zoom call, and I gave my oral order, and Ensign was like, well, that's attorney-client privilege. And he eventually wheedled some names out. He said that there were 2 folks over at Homeland Security, James Percival and Joseph Mazzara, and then Jay Bischoff at State. Those were the folks that Ensign told about Judge Boasberg's orders after the call. But okay, I don't want to get super in the weeds. Ultimately, what Judge Boasberg was saying was, did you directly tell a decision maker about my oral order? And Ensign said, well, it's attorney-client privilege, no, or whatever. And so then Judge Boasberg said, well, let me be very clear with you. I'm going to hold contempt hearings because I think my order was deliberately disobeyed. And I want to find out who deliberately disobeyed it. So, Mr. Ensign, how should I find out that information? And he said, well, Your Honor, I don't think you need to do that. Like, we've made some legal arguments. And Judge Boasberg was like, I want you to assume for purposes of argument, counsel, that I'm not going to grant your legal arguments. How should I find out? And, an Ensign kind of dissembled for a while. And that's when the court turned it over to counsel for the plaintiffs, Lee Gallant, who's been amazing throughout this. And he spoke for about 38 seconds. And what he said was, yeah, Your Honor, there are 3 ways that you can get information under oath from the government. Number 1, you can make them file declarations, right? Affidavits. But if you do that, like they've already lied to you in declaration. I am paraphrasing. If Lee is listening to the podcast, and you should be, he was much more had much more of a sense of decorum than I do. But like between the lines, he was basically saying, the government's filed a bunch of affidavits in this case, and it's either lied or dissembled or not given you the information. I don't think that would be too useful. But he said, but if the court wants to lay a record by having the government file declarations, we're fine with that. But basically, like, you can either hold a hearing, Your Honor, bring them in, make them testify under oath, under cross-examination, or you can let us take depositions. But either way, we're good with that. And then Judge Boasberg said, yeah, I'm going to take all of this under advisement. I will get back to you with an order sometime next week, but that will be on contempt. So look, this is a thing we have talked about, Liz, in terms of the Trump administration's foot soldiers feel perfectly confident marching into court and lying to judges. And I don't think that's going to stop until one of them spends a night in lockup. And if somebody's going to do that, I think Judge Boasberg is going to be the one.
Yeah, you and I talked about this a little bit before we went on the air. And I'm not sure that spending the night in lockup is what's about to happen here. I think it's more likely that he's going to say, you disobeyed my order. I want to put us back where we were, particularly because at least one of the people deported on these planes turned out to be somebody who had a non-deportation order. Right? That he was a person who had protected status and should not have been put on those planes. Now, the government has agreed that it happened, but they have not agreed to bring the guy back. And it's pretty clear that many of the people who were deported on these flights were deported on really flimsy bases. Like, they had tattoos, pretty common tattoos. And so, I mean, I don't think that he's necessarily going to lock up Ensign, but I think he might well assess some kind of penalty.
Yeah. 2 points on that. Number one, we have seen, because the plaintiffs introduced evidence of the decision-making matrix that the Department of State has used to identify Trinidad members, and it's things like having a tattoo of the star that really looks like the logo at like Mission Barbecue, right? I mean, it's just these things. Having a tattoo of an AK-47, which I wonder how many Trump supporters have that tattoo. Like these are preposterously stupid mechanism. So you're 100% right on that. There's been at least one person that the government has conceded was erroneously deported. That gets kind of the second point, and you're exactly right on that. And that is, Judge Boasberg asked about how the government might purge the contempt, right? So let's talk about that process for a second. Typically, when a party is in contempt of court, right? That is, you haven't produced your witness for a deposition. You can purge that contempt and end the sanctions, right? So we talked about this with Alex Jones, for example. He got escalating sanctions that doubled every single day. And the way in which he purged his contempt was by finally sitting for that depo. Well, the way in which the government would purge the contempt here would be bringing the deportees back. And that I think really is, we're talking about kind of the larger meta picture, but Judge Boasberg has a case in front of him. This case involves real people who are really in a Salvadoran hellhole right now. And I think Judge Boasberg is looking at ways to bring them back.
Okay. All right. We will be back on this one. As we said, there's a hearing on Tuesday. But now let's talk about tariffs.
Let's. I want to be very clear. We are here with these tariffs because of stupidity. It is very easy, and we often do this, to see Donald Trump as motivated sort of in equal measures by malice and greed, because, he is. And now that he is surrounded by truly evil sycophants who are willing to do whatever he wants, right? Like many of the things that this administration has done since taking office on January 20th are, I don't know, dastardly clever, right? Like sending in Doge to clean out government agencies before they can run to court. That's clever, but evil. Invoking the Alien Enemies Act to justify summarily deporting people you dislike outside the country's jurisdiction. Clever, but evil. Turning the Department of Justice into your personal law firm, right? Like those things are, in their own way, brilliant, right? But today is also an important reminder that Donald Trump is profoundly, desperately stupid. And when you are stupid and very powerful, you surround yourself with the kind of yes men who will not only never tell you how stupid you are, but will feed you all sorts of abject nonsense to tell you that your stupidity is actually galaxy brain level genius, right? And
yeah, we should definitely invade Greenland.
Right. And so that brings us to tariffs, because there is no 9-dimensional chess here. If you are looking for the clever in this, you will not find it. The only way to understand what Trump just did to our and the world economy is to understand that the President of the United States does not know what tariffs even are, and has surrounded himself with that aforementioned dangerous mix of sycophants and crazy people who will not tell him.
Well, that was a stem winder. But okay, let us say it loud for the cheap seats. Tariffs are a tax. Like if you buy a $20 shirt in the store and there's a 10% sales tax, that means that you, the consumer, pay $22 for that shirt, $20 for the store, $2 for the government. Fine. Okay, if Old Navy buys a shirt for $20 for a Chinese manufacturer and there's a 10% tariff on that shirt, then when the shirt clears custom, Old Navy will pay $22 for the shirt, $20 to the Chinese manufacturer, $2 to the federal government. Fine. So individual U.S. consumers are going to pay sales taxes. Individual U.S. companies are going to pay tariffs. Trump keeps saying that the Chinese manufacturer or the Chinese government is going to pay for the tariff, like to pay to get the product in the country. That's horseshit. I don't know how to tell you any other way. Foreign governments and companies do not pay U.S. taxes. Like, that doesn't even make any goddamn sense. That means what Trump did is a huge tax on U.S. companies, which I guess,
Right.
like, all right, we're liberals. We like to tax companies, right? No. And although it's pretty weird for Republicans to say, like, hey, taxing companies, that's well, they don't say that. They say some other nonsense.
Yeah, but you ask a good question, right? Which is, why would the Republican Party that's funded by billionaires want a huge corporate tax hike? And the answer has to do with elasticity of demand, right? Which explains where the ultimate burden of that tax gets shifted. So what progressives like you and I favor is a tax increase on corporate profits. Easy example, Elon Musk and his supine board at Tesla votes Elon Musk a $56 billion bonus for his amazing leadership. Elon Musk would be the person who would pay any taxes on that bonus. If Musk wanted to try and shift that tax burden onto consumers, the only way to do that would be to increase the price of Teslas. That would be very stupid, even for Elon Musk, because the demand for Teslas is highly elastic with respect to price, right? Like, if Teslas all of a sudden cost more and the price of, I don't know, Hyundai Ioniqs stay the same, then more people are going to buy the Hyundais and fewer people will buy Teslas. So Musk can't pass that burden on to the consumer. He's going to have to eat it himself, which is good, unless you're Elon Musk. But if you increase tariffs, let's go back to your t-shirt example, Liz. Like, I hate to be the one to tell our listeners this, but pretty much every U.S. company that sells t-shirts imports them from somewhere, be it China or Bangladesh or what have you. So that means, to take your example, if Old Navy is now paying $22 for a shirt instead of $20, they can pretty much pass all of that extra $2 in cost onto their consumers, knowing that each and every one of their competitors is also subject to the same increased tariffs. So now every t-shirt, no matter who you buy it from, costs $2 more at the store. So the elasticity of demand for Old Navy shirts doesn't shift appreciably away from Old Navy into, like, Land's End or Target or what have you, right? Old Navy gets to keep its profit margin and shift the burden onto consumers. And yes, to our econ professor listeners, I know you're out there. I see you. There are substitutionary effects, right? Some people will just buy fewer t-shirts if they're all $2 more expensive. There are also subtle shifts in the relative demand curve. This isn't an econ show. The basic principle is that it's way, way easier to shift the burden to consumers if it's a tariff than if it's a tax on corporate profits.
Counterpoint, Trump and his advisors say that because you're only taxing foreign imports, that means companies will start buying more t-shirts made in America. This will lead to a manufacturing renaissance here. Here, I'm going to play a little clip.
If you want your tariff rate to be zero, then you build your product right here in America.
Yeah. This is the argument for protectionism. It was dumb in 1930. It is beyond anachronistic today on the level of, like, the free silver bimetallism movement, right? But let me try and steelman the argument as best as I possibly can. So stick with our t-shirt example. The protectionist argument would go something like this. It would say, if Old Navy has to choose between buying a $20 shirt from a Chinese manufacturer or a $21 shirt from a U.S. manufacturer, it'll pick the Chinese. But if you slap a 10% tariff on imports from China, that will make the Chinese shirts cost more than the U.S. made ones. And so Old Navy will start buying U.S. based shirts instead. And I guess I want to first note with respect to Trump that, like, if the tariff works to do that, right? Like, if it actually does reduce the rate to zero because companies are now buying American, then companies aren't paying the tariff, right? So you can't say simultaneously both that tariffs will bring back American jobs and that they're going to raise a bunch of money.
Yeah, I think I kind of want to break that one down for a second, because there's this tension in the middle of the whole tariff scheme. Like, okay, no one's surprised at a lack of logical consistency in the Trump's administration's position on anything. But really, his advisors are saying two contradictory things at once. On the one hand, you have the people who think Trump is trying to mob boss his way through like he always has, right? The plan here would be go rough up everyone in the neighborhood and demand they pay protection money so we don't do it again. That's what Trump's doing to the universities and the law firms, using federal dollars or the federal power of contract to extract concessions, counting on the fact that he can like pick them off one at a time. So in that world, we're not relying on tariffs to fill government coffers. We're just doing this as a negotiation tactic. And Trump did say that today. He said, every country's calling us. That's the beauty of what we do. We put ourselves in the driver's seat. If we would have asked these countries to do us a favor, they would have said, no, now they'll do anything for us. Tariffs give us great power to negotiate. They always have. Okay, fine. But at the same time, you have Trump, who says this, and his advisors like Peter Navarro and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick talking about using tariff revenue to replace taxes to fund the government. So they make these weird noises about the external revenue service replacing the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service. And Trump says things like, nonsense words about how rich America was when we ran on tariffs instead of income taxes. I mean, the reality was that every time there's been a massive tariff scheme, it crashed the economy. But you have to see that these two positions are in tension, right? You either are going to get these tariffs, which is really going to fill the government coffers and help us do away with the income tax, or this is just a negotiation tactic and the tariffs aren't going to be a long-term thing, in which case the onshoring is never going to happen.
Yeah, when your model for economics was obsolete in the 19th century, it's probably not a great idea. Look, Trump is saying that tariffs are going to cause a massive onshoring of manufacturing jobs, right? It's going to revitalize the American steel industry or whatever. And companies will now build factories here and it will spur a domestic industrial revival. And I guess your point, Liz, is well taken. At best, either we're going to fill the coffers with tariffs or we're going to make stuff here, but you can't do both.
I mean, spoiler alert, we're not going to do either. Trump is going to declare victory and go home like he always does if the market gets any worse.
Yeah, right. Here on planet Earth, none of this math works at all. I mean, let me go back because I made that $20 t-shirt thing really easy to understand with round numbers, hopefully. But the difference between the wholesale price of a t-shirt manufactured in the U.S. and one manufactured in China or Bangladesh is not $20 versus $21, right? It's more like $2 versus $20, right? So if tariffs raise the cost of importing a $2 shirt to $3 or $4, that'd be 100% tariffs, right? Would be raising it to $4. That's still not going to shift manufacturing back to this country, right? It's not going to close the gap to $20. Old Navy isn't going to like paying $2 more for each of their imported shirts, and they're going to raise the prices on all of us as consumers, but they're not going to start sourcing their shirts from a local factory or building their own factory that, charges $20 or more a piece. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, in 2018, Forbes ran an article that was called "How Much Would an iPhone Cost If Apple Were Forced to Make It in America?" We can link to that in the show notes. The answer was, quote, in the $30,000 to $100,000 range. And no, this is not a typo.
Right.
We don't have to speculate because Trump ran this exact same playbook in his first term, and it was a disaster, right? Starting in January of 2018, he imposed a bunch of tariffs, including 20% on washing machines. And after the hike, producers raised the price of washers by an average of $86, but they also raised the price of dryers, which were not subject to the tariff, by $92 because consumers are used to dryers costing a little more than washers. And also, that's how capitalism works. If you can charge more for it, you're going to do it.
Right.
So American consumers wound up paying an extra $1.5 billion to wash and dry our clothes, thanks to Trump's tariffs the first time around. And those taxes brought in just $82 million in revenue, and they created, by the most optimistic estimates, 1,800 new American jobs, which is a per job cost to the U.S. taxpayer of more than $750,000 each. And every time I see that, I think, oh, universal basic income. I mean, I know people don't like it. It's out of fashion at this moment, but I still like it. Okay, we're going to take another ad break, and after that, we will be right back.
And we're back. So before the break, Liz, you were telling us the orders of magnitude of a disaster that Trump's tariffs on washing machines were to American consumers. And I just want to say, like, we could do this for every tax that he levied back in his first term, right? Like, the steel tariffs created none net new jobs in the steel industry. But the higher prices on imported steel led to an estimated 75,000 jobs lost in construction industries that, are secondary, that have to pay to import steel. TLDR, high tariffs are bad. They are terrifically inefficient at raising revenue. And when they do, it's regressive, right? The tax burden is passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices, which are borne and felt disproportionately by those with the least amount of income. So, okay, tariffs are bad. Now let's talk about what Trump did yesterday, because on Wednesday night, the president announced a baseline tariff of 10% on all goods imported into the United States after Saturday, April 5th. And then he added an additional set of what he called reciprocal tariffs on 57 separate countries from Algeria to Zimbabwe. They are not reciprocal, by the way, but let's put a pin in that for now.
So Trump's additional tariffs range from a low of 11% to a high of 50%. So among our largest trading partners, that's 34% on China, 27% on India, 24% on Japan, and 20% on the European Union. And those are like on top of, they're not adjusting the tariff rate. They're in addition to the existing tariffs, which Trump has already, in a lot of circumstances, already jacked up. So for example, on February 1, Trump increased tariffs on China by 10%. On March 3rd, he increased it by another 10%. Yesterday, another 34%. And math being math, 65% tariff on China. So hang on, guys. I'll be right back. I got to go order everything. I have to go order everything. I will be right back. No, I'm kidding. And if you're wondering how that stacks up compared to some of the more disastrous moments of American history, let's compare it to the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, which imposed tariffs of up to 59% on imported goods, and which pretty much everyone agreed made the Great Depression much, much worse. It also failed to create U.S. jobs, and it drastically decreased the market for U.S. exports as other countries enacted retaliatory tariffs on American goods. Although I have heard from Donald Trump that no one would dare to retaliate. They all just want to make a deal. But 65 is obviously bigger than 59, so Trump's taxes are worse than the worst tariffs of the last 100 years. As The Economist put it, America's overall tariff rate will soar above its Depression-era level back to the 19th century. Do you think that's good? It doesn't sound good.
No, and you tried to bait me. We have a lot to cover. I do have a clip of our idiot-in-chief saying that Smoot-Hawley was awesome, and if it only hadn't been eliminated, it could have stopped the Depression. And I'm going to confine my thoughts to just two things. Bueller. Fair. Number one, no person with an undergraduate degree in economics or better thinks that Smoot-Hawley was awesome, right? I don't care what school of economics you go to, it was a disaster. And number two, wasn't so good for the guys who slapped their names on it back in 1930, right? Like Senators Reed Smoot and Willis Hawley, and everyone associated with this tariff got their ass kicked in the very next election, 1932, right? Not just Smoot and Hawley, 10 other Republican senators, also President Herbert Hoover, who signed it into law, and he wound up losing to Democrat Franklin Delano Roosevelt in a landslide. So I don't know, maybe there's a pot of gold at the end of this rainbow.
Well, could be. I mean, we did very well in the special election on Tuesday, including we won the hotly contested Wisconsin Supreme Court race. So, I mean, there's going to be a lot of trouble before we get to that end of the rainbow, but maybe. Anyway, but I just want to flag. What Trump is promising is that we're going to go back to this period between the wars or right after World War II, where the disparity between America's power, right, economic, military, cultural, was so wide, right? We had so much more power than everyone else that we could just call the shots and treat other countries like colonies. And that world does not exist anymore. It changes. I mean, Canada has basically told us to get bent. But okay.
Bent. Now they told us to get bent.
They told us to get bent. But okay, let's talk about Trump's claim that these are reciprocal tariffs. They're not. I'm not sure if he knows what the word reciprocal means. It does not mean that, but maybe he's using the word reciprocal because it sounds like it's fair. It has like an intuitive appeal. So, right, if China has a 10% import tariff on our stuff, we're going to impose a 10% tariff on Chinese goods, which is like, that's not what happened. But okay, Andrew, pull that pin. Explain this bullshit math to us.
I will do my best because this is bonkers. I will link. And if you're sitting at your computer listening to this or somewhere where you can pull this up, the U.S. Trade Representative fact sheet, it's in the show notes, so that you can follow along with this equation, okay? But before we get there, so go ahead, pull it up now. I want to highlight two really important pieces of misinformation that the Trump administration is trying desperately to disguise. The first is that these tariffs are not calculated based on trade rates, which is the only sensible way to do any of this, right?
That would be reciprocal.
Yeah, exactly. They tax us 10%, we tax them 10%. No, they are calculated based on the relative trade deficit between the United States and the target country. And that makes no sense. So let's take China, for example, right? The United States exports about $145 billion, mostly in agricultural goods. And by the way, that's a lot lower than it has been because Trump won the election, right? But we export $145 billion in goods that we sell to China. We import about $440 billion in goods from China. So the difference between those two numbers, 440 minus 145, is our trade deficit with China. That is $295 billion.
Yeah, again, to interrupt one more time, trade deficits are the result of deliberate policy choices, many made by Republicans who used to believe in free trade over the last 50 years. We've negotiated these trade deals that allow us, a rich country, to buy vast quantities of cheap consumer goods from countries where production costs are lower. Like, we want those $5 t-shirts from Bangladesh. I mean, I don't know when the last time you shopped for a t-shirt at Target was, but you can get a lot of those things for $5, right? And we all do. We buy lots of those. That's not saying that that's how we should do it. There's a lot to criticize about fast fashion, but like, the reason that fast fashion exists is because of policy choices that we made. And we want our $300 flat screens from China, and we want our delicious coffee beans from Ethiopia, and we don't want to pay a lot for them. And
you hit me where I live, Liz.
Yeah, I know. And look, we want that stuff, whether or not Ethiopians like buy a Buick, right? Look, I mean, I guess you could say I'm running a trade deficit with the grocery store because Trader Joe's isn't, subscriber to the show.
Well,
but I'm not mad about it. Like, I get the groceries, Joe gets the money. We're cool. I mean, I need those dried mangoes for real. I should probably get all of them now that you probably aren't going to be able to get them. But look, Trump and his top economic advisors, like Peter Navarro particularly, have argued that that's not fine. And I should go beat up that nice dude in the Hawaiian shirt at Trader Joe's and tell him if he doesn't start buying something from me, he's going to be sorry. And so by that demented logic, the bigger the trade deficit, the more those countries that sell us stuff have to be punished.
Yes. And that feeds into the second lie, which is how these tariffs are calculated. So I told you to get up the USTR sheet because, oh boy, here's what the administration says. They say delta T sub I equals X sub I minus M sub I over epsilon times phi times M sub I. And Liz, doesn't that sound super like mathy and real, like it came out of an econ textbook?
I was an English major, so I'm going to take your word on that.
Well, hate to break it to you, it's all made up. Delta T sub I is just their notation for how much are we going to jack up the tariffs, right? That delta means change. And I really did. I had a long exposition. I was super excited to tell you that epsilon was going to be the price elasticity of import demand, and phi was the elasticity of import prices with respect to tariffs. And I had this huge rabbit trail all planned. And then I came to this. They say on the sheet, you can scroll down, parameter values for epsilon and phi were selected.
Assume a can opener. that one I did know.
Yeah, spherical cow. So look, when they say selected, what that means is they're not variables, they're constants. Okay, constant's a fixed number. So what fixed number did the administration select? You will be intrigued to know they picked 4 for epsilon and 0.25 or 1/4 for phi. And then the equation on the bottom is epsilon times phi, and 4 times 1/4 is 1. They multiplied the denominator by 1. It all cancels out.
That's super mathy.
Yeah, it sure is. So when you do that, the tariff rate is just the trade deficit that country has with the U.S. divided by the total amount of imports from that country. And then divided by 2 because, and I swear to God, I'm not making this up, Trump said he wanted to be kind.
For nations that treat us badly, we will calculate the combined rate of all their tariffs, non-monetary barriers, and other forms of cheating. And because we are being very kind, we're kind people, very kind. You're not so kind when you got ripped off with your salaries. My auto worker friends and my Teamster friends and all of the unions that typically voted Democrat, they're not voting Democrat anymore because worker, whether union or non-worker, they're for the Republicans now. That's what happened. But we will charge them approximately half of what they are and have been charging us. So the tariffs will be not a full reciprocal. I could have done that, yes, but it would have been tough for a lot of countries who didn't want to do that. I'd like to see the chart if you have it.
Oh,
God, my head hurts. So let's put all that together. We have a $295 billion trade deficit with China. We import $440 billion in Chinese goods. So 295 over 440, that's 67%. Half of 67 is 34. And sure enough, when you look at Schedule 1 to the administration's executive order, the new tariff rate that they jacked up on China is 34%, which, by the way, they did that despite the fact that they have, as you pointed out, Liz, increased tariffs on China twice in the past 2 months. So I don't know. I guess they could have picked numbers out of a fucking hat. But other than that, it is really hard to imagine how these could have been any more insane.
Yeah, that's it's clearly just made up. Okay, we're going to take one more ad break, and then we're going to talk about the law because it is a law show.
Oh, what a great idea.
All right, we'll be right back. And we are back. Okay, that, at long last, takes us to the legal analysis of tariffs. That would be Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which says that Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, which certainly sounds like Congress gets to make decisions about tariffs.
Yeah.
But Congress has also delegated some of that authority to the executive branch over the years, including, in particular, the right of the president to make emergency declarations. And as we saw in Trump's first term, his MO is to take what's supposed to be an exception in exigent circumstances and label everything an emergency, like just pull the fire alarm, do what you wanted to do, and call it a day. So, for example, in 2019, Congress refused to allocate funds for Trump's border wall, and Trump simply just declared a state of emergency and stole $8 billion in funds from military housing to pay for it. So yesterday's tariffs cited 3 laws as justification for Trump pulling the alarm bell and stealing Congress's power. The first was the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, the National Emergencies Act, and the Trade Tariff Act of 1974.
Yeah. Let's start off with that last one first, because that is a total lie. Right. The section Trump cites from
shitting me.
Yeah, from the Trade Act of 1974, it's 19 USC section 2483. And that just says the president shall, from time to time as appropriate, update the harmonized tariff schedule of the United States. And Liz, I would love to do a deep dive on the harmonized tariff schedule of the United States. It is 99 chapters of delightful geekiness. You can't even...
You know, I did a video on it. It actually is just like so hilariously arbitrary.
It is.
It's like, is it a costume? Like Santa costumes are the most amazing like confluence because like, is it a costume? Is it pants?
Yeah.
It's got a whole thing.
Is it a durable good or a cheaply made good? So... Let's look at chapter 95, which is toys, games, and sports equipment. no wonder I picked that one. Badminton rackets are classified as one category. They are subject to a 30% import tax. But racquetball and squash rackets are subject to a 40% import tax. I mean, I guess the badminton lobby wears the pants in Washington, D.C.?
I'm not going to comment on that one. But the point is that the harmonized tariff schedule is super important and super complicated. But nothing Trump is doing has anything to do with what Congress authorized him to do.
Yeah.
But okay, let's talk about the emergency acts.
Yeah, that's a little more complicated, right? So you mentioned IEEPA, that is 50 USC section 1701 et sec. And that is what Trump cites as the underlying authority to raise tariffs. IEEPA may be used, quote, to deal with any unusual and extraordinary threat which has as its source in whole or substantial part outside the United States to the national security, foreign policy, or economy of the United States if the president also declares a national emergency under that second provision that the National Emergencies Act with respect to that threat. So those two work together. And Trump has now done that, right? Section 1 of this executive order declares a national emergency, quote, arising from conditions reflected in large and persistent annual trade deficits. He claims the trade deficits compromise U.S. economic and national security by rendering the economy less resilient to supply chain disruption, and then there's an assertion about it compromising military readiness for reasons.
Right. This is what we see Trump do time and again. He says this endemic situation, which has like multiple complicated factors, is actually an emergency, right? Immigration is emergency. Nicaragua is an invading army, emergency. Trade deficits are not an emergency. They are a policy choice. Right. But at the same time, he's saying, I'm doing this because trade deficits are an emergency. He'll totally undercut it by saying, I'm doing this to prop up the domestic manufacturing sector, or I'm doing this to collect tariffs so we don't have to charge taxes, or this is the more honest one, I'm doing this so that we will renegotiate our trade agreements.
Right.
And, I'm pulling the fire alarm and knocking the table over as a kind of a bargaining tactic. Look, it's the same as when he used the emergency of COVID to seal the border and exclude asylum seekers.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And from a legal perspective, in terms of whether that justification will hold up, I don't know. Courts really defer. Like, they are unlikely to second guess a president's invocation of emergency powers. And this is not so preposterously objectively false that you can do a Judge Ana Reyes and say, kind of go through and explode all of it. And I should add on top of that since the 1980s, I know of no court decision that has overturned a presidential determination of a national state of emergency. Okay. But here's the thing. Even if courts have to defer to the president on declaring a state of emergency, IEEPA does not say that the president can impose tariffs in response to an economic emergency, right? Here's what it says, that the president can investigate, regulate, or prohibit foreign bank transactions, that's freezing accounts, or the importing or exporting of currency or securities subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, which doesn't seem to count, or to regulate the importation or exportation of any property in which any foreign country or national thereof has any interest by any person or with respect to any property subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. And we know what that language in IEEPA was meant to encompass. It was meant to cover that, say, if, France is discovered to be harboring a fugitive terrorist from the United States, you'd want the president to be able to freeze French bank accounts that the terrorist could otherwise access, right? And you'd want that to be an emergency executive powers that, you don't have to convene a special session of Congress and pass a vote and break the filibuster and have it read back into the record 3 times, because by the time that happens, the terrorist will have cleaned out the bank account. Okay, fine.
Yeah, well, that actually doesn't appear to have anything to do with tariffs.
No, it does not. And the precedent here is, I would say, non-existent. Charitably, it's thin. Here is the closest case. In August of 1971, President Richard Nixon imposed a temporary 10% tariff on many goods to address the potential balance of payments problems that the United States was having. That was Proclamation 4074. It was super vague about the source of its authority. It's cited to the Constitution and the statutes, including but not limited to the Tariff Act of 1930 and the Trade Act of 1962. And you will notice Nixon did not cite to IEEPA. Partly that's because IEEPA would not get passed until 1977 after Nixon was out of office. But anyway, in response to having enacted those tariffs, a Japanese zipper manufacturer sued to challenge them in court. That case went all the way up to the Supreme Court. It was called U.S. versus Yoshida International. That was the zipper manufacturer. And in court, the Nixon administration said, oh, yeah, but when we said the statutes including but not limited to, that included a statute we might call a predecessor to IEEPA. The language is kind of similar. It was called the Trading with the Enemies Act. There are salient differences. Anyway, the point is that the Supreme Court upheld Nixon's tariffs, saying that the power to impose them came from the power to regulate imports, which, seems like it might apply here. But on the other hand, crucial to the Supreme Court's holding in that case was the, as it described, limited nature of Nixon's tariffs, right? And so the Supreme Court said that did not render the congressional delegation of its authority to impose taxes unconstitutionally broad.
Yeah, that's what we began this section with, right? Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says that Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises, that they can't just abdicate all of that power to the president.
Yeah, and this is already in courts. Day one, in fact, the tariffs have not gone into effect yet, but day one after the proclamation, in the weirdest way possible. So a group called the New Civil Liberties Alliance is suing on behalf of a Florida importer on the theory that the tariffs on China are illegal. The New Civil Liberties Alliance is one of those anti-regulatory shops. They represented one of the plaintiffs in the cases that overturned Chevron deference. They are always railing about the administrative state.
Look, man, rat hairs and listeria in your hot dogs are the price of freedom.
Salmonella. Okay. I am just going to read you the relief that is requested in this case, because what they want is a declaratory judgment pursuant to 28 U.S.C. Section 2201A, declaring that the China executive orders are unlawful and unconstitutional, either one, because they are ultra-virus as not being authorized by the statute, or two, because the IEEPA violates the Constitution by failing to provide an intelligible principle constraining actions a president takes under that statute.
I cannot believe you're making me cheer for libertarians. Although, interestingly, I looked at this case and they talk about the major questions doctrine, which we're not going to get into. We're like already in an hour here. But the major questions doctrine is this kind of made up thing where the president, a Democratic president, will do something and the courts will say, no, it looks like Congress let you do that. But actually, no, because Congress can't have delegated that power to you under the major questions doctrine. Don't ask what the major questions doctrine. It's like whatever makes Brett Kavanaugh's ass itch. The point is, it would be hilariously funny if Trump's tariff power got overturned under the major questions doctrine, which is this, once again, fantastical invention by conservative justices to rein in Democratic presidents.
I mean, it certainly is a major question, but Liz, I cannot tell you why this lawsuit was filed in the Northern District of Florida. I mean, Pensacola is lovely this time of year.
Hey, Joe.
If you wanted to win, you would definitely have venue and probably a better shot in the District of Columbia. But as it is, they got a Trump appointee named T. Kent Wetherell II, which I'm sorry, like he sounds like the guy who owns the ski shop in a John Hughes movie, or like the snooty neighbor in an 80s sitcom.
I think he was in Caddyshack, pretty sure. But, okay, perhaps this little Gen X jaunt has taken us far afield from the topic.
Wow.
The issue is, will the Supreme Court let Trump get away with stealing Congress's power in this and in every other thing, right? He's already stolen the spending power. Will he get to steal the taxing power too? And I suspect he will. But all right, could Congress do something here? Could Congress take back this power, which they have theoretically delegated, it's not a major question.
Yeah. They could, right? Like, I think this is a real question, right? Congress could terminate the underlying national emergency by just enacting a joint resolution of disapproval using the expedited procedures that were provided in that National Emergencies Act that Trump cited, right? They took a little protest vote today in the Senate. 51 voted against tariffs on Canada, and there are only 47 Democrats, right? I mean, not that it matters yet because Speaker Mike Johnson is a craven tool, but things change. More broadly, Congress could also amend IEEPA to clarify in that language, make it just crystal clear that when we said regulating imports, we did not mean imposing tariffs. And I know I can almost hear the eye rolling of our listeners.
I mean,
right?
I'm already rolling my eyes because I know what you're about to say, but go ahead and say it anyway.
Look, Congress right now is as supine to Donald Trump as it's possible to be, but Congress is getting hammered. You talked about Tuesday's special elections, and the Dow was down 1,700 points today. The S&P was down 5%. NASDAQ was down 6%. And taken together, that means that companies that are publicly traded lost $3.1 trillion in wealth today because we have a demented toddler as president. At some point, Republicans are going to either have to stand up to that guy or lose.
Counterpoint, the operation is over. The patient lived and he is healing. The prognosis is that the patient will be far stronger, bigger, better, and more resilient than ever before. Make America great again.
Is he riffing on the $6 million man theme there?
No, he's not. What he thinks is, look, what he's saying is, I know it really hurts, but I've excised this tumor and you'll just have to live with several months of pain, but then everything will be better again because onshoring or negotiations or some shit like that. I don't know. That is what he thinks. He thinks that he had to rip the Band-Aid off.
We live in the dumbest possible timeline.
No, actually not, because I just checked the president's social media feed and he has a whole thing about the witch hunt against Marine Le Pen is another example of European leftists using lawfare to silence free speech. So Marine Le Pen, the European far-right candidate who was just convicted of corruption, and apparently it's bothering Trump. He thinks it's lawfare.
Can't
imagine. The leftists. Yeah, I told you it could get dumber. All right, that's going to do it for us today. You guys have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. And as we said, we will be back Tuesday with a fun guest and Monday with written content, as always. Thank you, guys.
Law and Chaos Podcast is a production of Raise Ipsa Media, LLC, is intended solely as entertainment, does not constitute legal advice, and does not form an attorney-client relationship. This show is researched and written by Liz Dye and produced by Bryce Blankenagel. Law and Chaos Pod, copyright Raise Ipsa Media, LLC, all rights reserved.